So when it comes to this sort of, peach fuzz type of situation where we have, little blonde hairs picking up light, generally what we're trying to do is to minimize the extent of the contrast difference between it. So for the most part, we're going to be doing a lot of dodging there, but also a little bit of burning within some of these lighter hairs. So I'm not going to fix all this because we're going to be here for the duration of what this lesson has already been. I'm going to kind of show you on one area, and then, we'll move on from there. So looking at color, we can see that, there's really no color shifts here. It's more just, obviously here it's lighter because it's on the edge of the cheekbone. So that's just kind of, we're naturally going to see that. And of course, we have a little bit more of the fuzz picking up there, so it's just more desaturated than everything else. I'm not so much concerned about this area. It's more just these sort of darker spots in between the lighter hairs themselves. So what we're really dealing with here, obviously, is a luminosity issue, and that is what is causing our eye to notice that this is going on. So again, we're going to create another group. Actually, let me just go ahead and use my just curves, dodge, burn action here, which I always recommend that you make. And I'm actually going to get pretty aggressive on this. So let me go ahead and sort of mask in one area. So we're going to be dodging. Let's just grab this like tiny chunk here, and maybe I'm trying to grab kind of the dark chunks that I noticed. So like maybe these two here. Go into Q, and let's again blur this a little bit. That should be good, around 3 or 4. All right, and then go into this, and I'm going to hit Option Delete. I'm going to paint in white, and basically going into the actual curve itself, let's kind of adjust this until we notice it almost get as bright as the area surrounding it. So the light hairs around it, we want to almost get to that level, because that's kind of our maxed out level. We know we don't ever have to dodge beyond that. So that's kind of how we're going to determine that. And then for the burn, let's go ahead and grab a couple little tiny segments here. Something like that. This guy here. This guy here. And we're not going to necessarily use this, but this is just kind of our sample, so we can determine what we need to do. So Q, Command F to repeat our blur, Q again, and then go into burn. And once again, Option Delete to fill with white in those areas. Deselect. Let's go into here, and then let's see kind of how much we need to adjust this so that it's going to max out. So probably somewhere in around there is fine. That's more than we'll ever need. Okay, so now let's go back and just hit Command Delete, which is going to fill with our background color, which is black, because we want to mask this in separately. So Command Delete, and then we're going to grab our brush, and usually for this I'll use like a pretty aggressive flow rate, like something like 4%, because I just don't want to be here all day. And we just essentially paint. So yeah, you can see that this is not a fun thing to do, but again, this is really the most correct way to do it, because it doesn't really screw up the texture. It doesn't, kind of throw things off, because we see a lot of strong texture here. We don't want to have a big blurry mess here. So that's basically what we're gonna have to do, is just kind of go through all of these really contrasty areas where we see dark patches in between the hairs, and basically dodge them so that they're less noticeable. And then we're going to go into the hairs themselves, and we're going to burn those. And I'm not going to do all this because you're probably getting bored already, but let's just do a couple of different areas here so you can kind of see what's going on. And it's often a matter of finding a middle ground, right? We're not going to dodge the dark areas to match the light areas. We're going to kind of get it to the middle, and then we're going to burn some of the light areas to mix with that. So just the lightest spots I'm basically painting over so we can darken them. All right, so we're really kind of just concentrated on this area here. So let's just kind of finish that area up so you can get a picture of what's going on. But of course we have to do this everywhere here, especially down in this area where we have a lot of contrast. And then maybe let me just grab the dodge a little bit and work on these. And we could probably up our flow rate a little bit, to be honest with you too, because it's requiring more strokes than we really should be doing here. So we could probably go up to like 7, even maybe even 10% for something like this. You can build it up pretty quickly. It's not super sensitive work. Okay, so basically if we toggle that on and off, you can see what a difference that makes, especially when we zoom out. The contrast is just dramatically reduced. So, you know, what really hasn't taken us that long does have a pretty drastic impact. Now, again, if we were dealing with black and white, that would be fine. We wouldn't have to really do anything else with this. But of course, again, if we turn this off, you can really see, you can actually see the dots here. Do you see that when we go in? We can see those dots of saturation. So we have to deal with that. We can either go in and try luminosity, or we need to go in and actually adjust it manually. So let's just take that off. I'm going to get rid of luminosity because, as you can see, it's not really helping, right? Let's just double check here. Actually, we don't want luminosity on burn. Hang on. Let's just take that off. I want dodge to be on luminosity. Although burn could be fine, but really it's our dodging that's an issue. With the areas that we've dodged in between here, you can just see how saturated they are. So let's try luminosity. And you know what? It's pretty close. Like, it's definitely better if we toggle back. You know, you can see right there, it's pretty saturated. In luminosity, it's a little bit better, but it's not quite there. So once again, there it is in luminosity. There it is in the original. So definitely more pronounced in the original. But I'd rather, I think, fix this manually. So we can either do that using this helper layer. So just grab our hue saturation adjustment, clip that down. Nope. There we go. All right. And we can go into reds or yellows again, and then start pulling down our saturation until we see, obviously that is way too far. We can see that it's causing things to look a little bit off in our color helper. So probably something like that should look good, hopefully, when we take off our color helper. And yeah, I think it does, right? So we can see that all kind of flows together before, after. We've fixed the luminosity shift, and the color tends to flow together pretty well. Now with the burn, generally we shouldn't have too much of an issue with the burn. I don't really think we do. We could technically desaturate it a little bit. Let's see if we really need to do that. I don't think we do. I think overall it looks pretty good. So with that one, I wouldn't necessarily worry about actually changing it. Now what I would probably do at the end is to work on this whole patch here in general. I'd want to actually pull that so that the color matches a little bit better. So if you're feeling up to it, let's go ahead and take a look at that quickly and how we would actually do that. So let's just grab this. Now obviously this is not really completed. We should do this at the very end once we've kind of fixed all of our issues, because that's when it'll look good. And I've gone too far here, so I'm just going to pull that out. Let's just negate it. There we go. And again, Q, we're going to give it a little bit of blur here. Something like that. Okay. And, well, what do we need to do here? So maybe a little bit of saturation. So let's go to hue saturation. Let's go into reds and just increase our saturation a bit. And that, I think, already looks better. And then what we can also do is go into selective color and see if that helps us a lot. So clip it down. And then for something like this, again, we can target either reds or neutrals. Probably reds will be best. And again, pulling out a little bit of the cyan is going to bring some red in there for us. I think it's a little too aggressive here, so we're going to have to do a little bit of masking out, but that's, I think, helping. Magenta, I don't necessarily want to add. If anything, I actually want to pull a little bit of magenta out. And then maybe add a little bit of yellow, so it kind of pulls into a more of a skin tone sort of color. So something like that. I mean, in neutrals, again, we can experiment, but I think it's going to be a little too aggressive for us, and it's going to make things look unnatural. So that's, I think, pretty good. Let's go ahead and toggle that on and off. And really, you know, it's a subtle kind of thing, and we have to obviously fine-tune this, but you kind of get the idea. It's going to just make it flow together so it looks more like skin. This sort of patch here needs to be dealt with separately, and of course we need to burn a lot of this stuff in here and then dodge out these spots. But eventually we'll get to a good place where that whole cheek is looking good, and of course we have to take these little areas. But, you know, even with that work that we did there, you can see what a difference that makes. Again, just using essentially a couple of adjustment layers and a few simple corrective tools for color. Hue saturation and selective color generally will solve the majority of your problems. So that is kind of a whirlwind coverage of sort of those minor color adjustments that you may need to make surrounding your dodging and burning. So it's kind of, you know, it's not related to dodging and burning, but at the same time it kind of is, because we can't just live in a vacuum where we just fix luminosity issues. We also need to deal with color issues, and generally the two go hand in hand, particularly in localized scenarios like we saw with the eye here, or the shadow in the eye, as well as sort of the peach fuzz on the cheek there. So that's why I thought that this lesson was important, because it's definitely something you need to know how to do, and rely less on things like frequency separation, which help with this, but they do it quite destructively, and they also affect skin texture pretty negatively. So this is really the correct way of doing these things.